Hey guys, it's Hank. I know you're all ready for me to get to the really advanced mind control stuff, the binaural frequency, Schumann resonance, alpha state programming, alpha state hypnosis, beta, theta, gamma, delta, omega waves, transmissions and such. And also to a point to speak on art, but we have to get through some basic concepts first to understand how people's minds have been controlled for so long. And we're continuing along the theme of engineering and financial engineering and economic inductance. And with economic inductance, it's essentially, if you watch the last video, the energies of financial engineering, basically you're learning about how all different mechanical, electronic, and economic forces all have energetic properties, and the engineering of these properties produces a result. And the result, when it comes to social engineering or financial engineering, is either going to be profit sometimes, or it's going to be control. Generally, it's control, because people that understand how to create these systems can make all the money that they want. I mean, money is not an issue for them. It's really a non-issue. It's a method of control. So let's get started right here real quick. Economic amplifiers, I'm going to kind of skip over that for the moment because it has more to do with psyops, and I'll get into psyops just a little bit later. But at present, I'm very, very busy with several projects. And psyops, it basically shares some things in common with the design of economic amplifiers. They share some very similar traits. When I talk about psyops at a future date, I'll talk about basically how to recognize them, with how they're constructed, basically how to counteract them. What the best way to deal with a psychological operation is. Anyway, financial engineering, as I've already stated, is mind control. And I'm not going to go too far into outputs on this video. I'm just going to make a quick statement. The accuracy of the output is the function of the inputs. Okay, so the output is the desired result. The input is all of the data that they can assign a value to, and then create an algorithm, and then make manipulations inside the market with shock testing, like we talked about in the last video, the energies of financial engineering. So the accuracy of the output is always going to be a function of the input. The output is basically gauged by a couple of things. The response, whether or not the response to the desired output is instant or it's delayed. Maybe it's intended to be instant, maybe it's intended to be delayed. It's a parametric input matrix. Also known as basically kind of like a rotary switch, if you think of it in mechanical terms, or if you think about it in programming terms, it would be a variable control switch. So it's like a yes, or a go, or a no, a no-go. Okay, so your parametric input matrix, so everything that has to do with all of the inputs is going to create your rotary switch, which is going to give you the yes or no condition. So now you've got a couple of things. You have response, instant delayed, And then you've got the yes or no. The power level of an output is essentially the scale. So you can think of this as maybe the scale could be national, or it could be personal, it could be a specific group, a targeted group, whatever. It's the scale. That's the power level of the output. Now, the accuracy of the response is essentially, did the economic, also known as, when you refer to things in the economic sense, you refer to them as logistics. So the logistical strategy, did the economic or logistical strategy achieve the desired output, and to what degree? So that's basically the final analysis. So if the outputs are achieved, then mind control, okay, because they got what they wanted. All right, whoever, did the shock testing, introduced the variables, targeted a certain group, whatever, outputs achieved, mind control, okay? Ancient form of mind control, been happening since before Christ. Probably since the advent of any kind of monetary system, and maybe even beyond that. I don't necessarily think that social engineering specifically has to be financial engineering, but financial engineering, since we live in a, well, I guess you could call it a capitalist system, even though it's not. It's a centrally controlled system, which is better defined as socialism or corporatism. And if you remember one of my earlier videos where I was talking about what the combination of socialism and corporatism equals, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's talk about just a few inputs today. I'm not going to go through them all because I've really got to get back to some other things. It always starts, your inputs always are going to start with an assessment. And the assessment is basically 6 questions. Who, what, when, why, how, and where. And they all have an assigned variable. So I've just gone A, B, C, D, E, F. Later on I might program a little something, develop an algorithm to actually kind of illustrate how this can be done. But for now, we're just going to use defined terms and not add in a whole bunch of math. In any input, you're going to have your general sources, okay? So this is telephone taps, or any kind of signals intelligence intercepts, any kind of physical surveillance, an analysis of your garbage, take a look at your children's behavior at school. Okay, all of these are general source inputs that give answers to these questions. The assessment. So let's go on to the social contacts. Social contacts would be your telephone, so your any kind of itemized record of your call, of your SMS messages, of your, you send back your Instagram or whatever. Now you're beginning perhaps to understand where the multi-billion-dollar value of Facebook and Google really is. Family. A lot can be discovered about your family, and this was even in the pre-electronic age. Marriage certificates, birth certificates. You can go down to the county courthouse, look all that up, and you've got a good look of social contacts, who their family is. Okay, their friends, associates can be picked up by telephone, physical surveillance, any of these other types of sources. But again, that's an input. A social contact is an input. So friends, associates, etc. Memberships in organizations, whether or not maybe your local Lions Club, it could be a local church, It could be a swim team, YMCA membership. Okay, memberships in organizations are going to give a better picture of whether or not if you're maybe a part of the YMCA, you're probably more healthy, or you're likely to be exercising or fit, and then you have a group of people, and you could see also who was signed up to that YMCA through the paper trail, get an idea of even a network that surrounds that. So, say you were a Shriner or a member of your local Lions Club. Okay, are you civically minded? Are you business minded? Do you belong to like a BNI, Business Networking International? Things like these give you give a programmer a picture of what's going on. So we call them inputs. Political affiliation. This is easily looked up. Your voting records. Who are you registered with? What party are you registered with? I mean, heck, it could be as simple as a bumper sticker on your car. It could be social media posts. It could be subscriptions to certain types of magazines. Political affiliation. Excuse me. All right. Bring this down real quick. Okay. Now, inputs, the personal paper trail is 5 through 9. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I went a little bit out of order because I haven't quite added in standard of living yet. Okay, standard of living. Food, what type of food do you consume? Clothing, what type of clothing do you wear? Everybody knows that if you kind of wear maybe like a shirt that's got paint all over it and a torn up pair of jeans and a rough old pair of sneakers, people will think differently of you than, say, if you were wearing Birkenstocks and a sweater vest and a pair of slacks. Or, maybe you're wearing a white collar, a white button-up shirt with a collar and a red tie or a blue tie. Maybe you have brown shoes, maybe you have black shoes, maybe you have gray pants. All these types of things, clothing gives an idea, input. Okay. Shelter, what kind of shelter are you using? Are you living with other people? What sort of arrangement is it? Is it a renting arrangement? Where geographically do you live? Things of that nature. You know what shelter is? Self-explanatory. Or maybe not self-explanatory, going back to the nature of thought, but anybody that watches my videos knows what shelter is. Okay. Transportation. What kind of car do you drive? Are you driving a red-hot Ferrari? Are you driving a beat-up pickup truck? Are you driving a four-door common sedan? Are you driving an import? Are you driving a domestic vehicle? Are you driving something like an electric car, a Tesla? Okay, transportation. Are you riding the bus? Are you walking? Are you riding around on your bike? Transportation. Very important input. Okay, so now we're going to get on to the personal paper trail. I'll bring the camera down again because it's very important, the personal paper trail. Okay, this is the methods by which data is collected, or, was back in the day. Still is today. The easy kind of stuff. All right. 5, that's your buying habits, your consumer preferences, okay? Your checking account, all right? It's easily accessible. Anybody can look at what your checking account balance is, what you've been spending money on, everything that runs through a debit card, checking account. And virtually anybody can access that information, whether they work in a bank or for a law enforcement agency, credit reporting agency, This information can be passed along to corporations, private individuals. So, checking account. Your credit card. Your credit card. Every time you swipe your credit card or your debit card, that transaction is immediately electronically processed, or near immediately, but very quickly processed, which gives input data as to what you're purchasing, the amount of the purchase, the time that you're purchasing it, the geographical location from which you're purchasing the item, and whether or not that fits a pattern. Another input there. And then you've got the third thing here, the buying habits or your consumer preferences. UPC codes. Now your QR codes, you can scan them with your smartphone. They link up exactly with what with who you are. It's life made even easier. And ISBN, which are numbers, barcodes that you would find on the back of books and things like that. It's a reference number. So those types of things, when they get rung up at the register, it gives input data on your buying habits. All right, let's see what would be the easiest thing to go to next. We'll just go straight over here to, well, we'll start with assets and then we'll go to liabilities. To bear with me, I'll show you this tower of babble that I constructed here to try and at least get you guys an opportunity to be able to see what is going on. I wish I had some other little piece to prop it up here in front. Let's try this. I think we can see all the assets there. Let's try this. If one part of the brain doesn't work, let's use another part of the brain. Although I guess it is all spatial intelligence. All right, assets. Checking account, how much is in it? Savings account. Let me get down on here because I want my face to be in the video, of course, too. Okay, your automobile, okay, is an asset. Your real estate holdings. Your business, what type of business that you're in. Holdings of stocks and bonds, and anything in your safety deposit box. All inputs. With, mind you, personal paper trail. All right, let's get on to liabilities. Okay, creditors. Do you have them? It could be anything from a loan shark to your local bank. Enemies. All right. Now we'll discuss enemies in the next video when we go on to inputs part 2. We're going over the really basic stuff now, but the enemies that I'll be talking about have to do with money, and that's why they're liabilities. So it's not just like you have a family member you don't really get along with. We're actually talking about a financial liability and an enemy that incurs a financial liability. So it's important to note when we're speaking of enemies under liabilities. Because when we want to work this all out into an algorithm, this would be assigned 2, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. I would probably label it a little bit differently and make it easier, but anyway, let's move on. Government sources part 1. Now I call government sources I divide government sources into 2 sections. One, because the first part is kind of like the free lunch or whatever the government's handing out. So you got welfare, Social Security, surplus food, anything that's any doles, any grants, any subsidies. Again, what's the point here? What's the point? Okay, what's the point of getting welfare? Is it just for welfare's sake? What's the point of getting Social Security? What's the point of getting a subsidy, a grant? Is it at face only just that, or is there some linkage to some greater thing? Okay, and again, that is part of the personal paper trail. Okay. Then this is the second part. I'm divide government sources into government sources too. These are typically your adversarial organizations. No, not necessarily, but they have a tendency to do things with force. This is you got the carrot or the stick. This is the stick side of it. Okay, so you've got the IRS, okay, Internal Revenue Service. You've got OSHA, okay. Basically going to give them all of your work habits, histories, injuries, so on and so forth, whether or not you're in compliance, if you're a business owner. So OSHA, you have census information, and then ever since the Amerithrax, and I'll just speak on this real briefly, after 9/11, they had to have a reason to go into Iraq. Because Iraq, well, they told us that Osama bin Laden was based out of Afghanistan. That's why we had to go into Afghanistan. And then, well, we knew that Osama bin Laden was actually a Saudi, but we weren't going to go into Saudi Arabia. I think George Bush Sr. liked to kiss the king. Barack Obama bowed to him, and Jr. may have given him a kiss on the lips. I think you can go back and find these things if you want to. Kind of weird stuff. But anyway, Bin Laden, the Bin Laden family, the Bin Laden group. I'm sure you know about all of these things by now. Well, there was no reason to go into Iraq. So what they did was they put some anthrax, weapons-grade anthrax, and a bunch of other white powder into envelopes and mailed them to a number of different congressmen. I think they were in the House of Representatives. I don't think any made it to the Senate. A couple of staffers opened up the mail. Maybe one or two of them got sick. Caused a big scare. They said, well, the only person that's got weapons-grade anthrax is Saddam Hussein, because back when Iraq and the United States were buddy-buddy, and Saddam Hussein was really good friends with George Bush Sr., maybe even earlier than that. I'm not quite sure about that. But they United States ended up giving chemical weapons, i.e. weaponized anthrax, to Saddam Hussein in Iraq for a potential war against Iran, because Iran would have just whipped the piss out of Iraq. Iran has not invaded anybody for like 250, maybe 300 years, but they train. They've got a big military. It's a pretty powerful military nation, at least as far as Middle East nations go. They have a lot of training, a lot of equipment. So if Iran wanted to come down and whip the piss out of Iraq, they could have done so. And I believe even at that time there was some designs that might have to do with maybe a Greater Israel Project or a balkanization of the Middle East. Sorry about the break. I ran out of camera memory there. Anyway, turns out that that particular grade of anthrax that was mailed to the offices of the congressman was traced back to a lab in Fort Detrick, Maryland. And it was impossible for the weaponized anthrax to be the same type of strain that Saddam Hussein had. They have very sophisticated ways of being able to tell, because only a few people in the world manufacture chemical and biological and nuclear weapons. And they all have sort of they all have a trace, and so they can tell where it came from. Well, the guy who blew the whistle on it, the scientist up there in Fort Detrick, well, he's dead. So I guess he had one of those 2 or 3 shot to the head suicides. They may have just found his body floating in a river, something like that. I don't really recall the specifics. But he had said for sure, yeah, that when you have a facility that designs biological and chemical agents, it is like one of the hardest places to get into. The security is the tightest in the world. Getting in and getting out. It makes Fort Knox look like a walk in the park, comparatively speaking, to these types of facilities. So there was no chance that a terrorist had just wandered into Fort Detrick, Maryland to get this one specific type of strain of anthrax. Came from there. Came from that facility. Well, this may have been for a couple of reasons. It either could have been... Well, it was actually so that they could say that Saddam Hussein was using chemical weapons against people of the United States, against government officials, and then we can invade Iraq. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. False flag done. And we're on our way into Iraq. But with this little hiccup, it kind of got buried. But it did have a result, and all your mail is now tracked. So, whatever your sender to receiver is, I'm not sure that they necessarily open your mail. They might. It certainly is against the Fourth Amendment, but so are so many other things that they do anyway. All your mail's tracked, and that goes back to the Amerithrax scandal. And it was buried. It was quickly buried because when the guy came out, identified it, the story just disappeared. And now, I believe Saddam Hussein at that time came up with some nuclear weapons program. Might have been an aspirin factory. But nuclear weapons. Anyway, those were the false flag pretenses to get us into war with Iraq. And now you have a good idea of the first part of these inputs. And the next video, we'll get on to outputs, and we'll continue on with our series on mind control. It's been Hank. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.